recording now. There we go. All right. Um, from this point forward, a lot of it's going to be presentation. So just give me 1 second. Share to this page.
See that? And people try to say there were no dinosaurs in the Bible.
No dinosaurs in the Bible. And we're going to do this from the beginning. Cool. Sweet. All right. Everyone can see what's going on?
Yep, I see the word cloud.
The word cloud. Okay, cool. So this is our word cloud, obviously. Next. Okay, so since it's a new month, there's a new question we're going to examine. Pretty much the format's going to be the same. I'm going to present the question today. We're going to write down answers. And then for the remainder of the month, we're going to talk about Lutheran context and theology versus personal theology. And then we're going to share our results of what we come up with at the end of the month. Okay?
Okay.
Nothing crazy new. Then we have, what is our question for the month? Our question for the month is, what are the differences between law and gospel? Okay? So if you have your notes with you, write that down real quick so that you have it and don't lose it. Okay?
Yikes.
All right, everyone good?
Yep.
All right. Then what is the law specifically? Traditionally, a lot of people view it as the Torah, or it's synonymous with saying things like Old Testament, where basically it's used to instruct the Jewish people in how to live a proper lifestyle and remain in proper worship and relationship with God. An example of the law would be the Ten Commandments. Okay?
Right.
Is that traditionally kind of how y'all have seen the law used in Scripture?
Yeah.
Okay. A more modern use of the law would be to put it in a context of what laws are used like to govern your society.
Mm-hmm.
When law is mentioned in the Bible, of course, that's a lot more about Old Testament because that was pretty much their law, like actual law. Whereas the law as well today can refer to those Old Testament uh, rules and lifestyle things, or can refer to things like the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and basically how a society is structured and governed. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So then, what is the purpose of the law within uh, the ELCA and Lutheran theology? The first thing is that when it comes to the Christian view of law, it's not just about how one should live their life in accordance to. Um, oh man, I am like all over the place in my mind today. It's not just about how one should live their life in accordance to what society deems to be morally correct, but essentially the law gives order instead of chaos. It puts creation in a straight and narrow, saying this is correct, this is wrong. All right. The law for Christians is about seeing how we can follow the law, and yet we're imperfect beings who are unable to live the law perfectly. We're unable to do what Christ did and not break the law ever. And through that imperfection and not being able to fully live the law in our lives, the purpose of the law then is to drive us to Christ for grace and forgiveness, and not being able to do those things. Okay, so first use of the law is that it orders creation, and the second use of it is that it drives us to Christ. Now, law is broken into 3 categories.
I do have a question though.
Yeah, what's up?
But in the earlier slide, when you were talking about like societal laws and things like that, you mentioned the Ten Commandments. Were you suggesting that the Ten Commandments?
I have an answer for that.
Oh, my Alexa started up. Sorry. Were you? She has an opinion about this. Were you suggesting that that tied into that tied into man-made law? Because that would be part of God's law, right?
That would be God's law, yes, but it was also man's law. Law is synonymous with saying this is what God commands and this is what society deems appropriate. Both those things fit into that category. God's law and man's law, they're both considered law, but it can get confusing on what definition of law you're talking about. But their purpose in the end ends up being the same. We're unable to perfectly fulfill the law, and that drives us to Christ.
Okay.
Okay. Like, I'm not saying that human law is as important as the Ten Commandments, but for purpose of what it does, it orders creation, societal law, and God's law do the same thing. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here are the 3 categories that law is broken down into. We talked about how it orders creation. It helps create a society of modern laws and biblical laws so that we can all live together with some sort of sanity. Okay, so we're all not just basically walking around with survival of the fittest. The next is law. Like I said, it drives us to Christ, where the law acts like a mirror. It shows us who we truly are, how we are sinful and broken. And upon realizing this, it should drive you to Christ for forgiveness and grace. All right. The third category is really kind of debated upon. A lot of people say the third category isn't even a thing, and so we're not really going to hardcore touch on it, but just so you can see what it is, the third category is where a lot of gray areas happen, where law and gospel kind of overlap. The best way I can explain it is to say that this is just a disputed area, and people are claiming about how the law is written on our hearts and how we know about ourselves and how to glorify God's will through the law, which is fine, great, awesome. But a lot of people go, okay, but that's still in the first category, but there are multiple situations where it kind of doesn't fit in that first category. So then they bring it down to a third one where there's a little bit of overlap between the first 2. But those situations are not as common and won't really be popping up in our discussion as much. So a lot of people just ignore it because it's such rare and one-off times. But for our purposes, we're just not going to look at it. Okay? I didn't want to ignore it.
Is that the theological term for it? Crazy mumbo jumbo?
Yeah. At least that's how it was taught to me. It was taught to me as it's a mess, answer a question, and then I asked a question and they were like, okay, that's kind of a difficult one to answer. That goes into category 3. Well, so basically it's the ones that can't be explained at least well to a sense where they would fit perfectly either in section 1 or section 2. So it goes into its own section 3.
Now, can you give us one example of
what
kind of law would be in that area?
I can't even think of one off the top of my head, honestly. like I said, they're random when they happen. So
okay, all right.
Well, when you say where they overlap, is it safe to say that that's meant to say that where they conflict? Because, like, for instance, like thou shalt not kill, obviously common law says we can't kill somebody. So that would be like where they overlap, but like, I don't see gray area in that.
Right. Well, I'm talking about where it would overlap with whether or not it's gospel or law. Like,
although what I just said is making me think of something though, in terms of gray area. Like I
Okay.
said, thou shalt not kill, but common law would say we can't kill either. But common law would say if we kill in self-defense, that
Right.
it's okay, whereas God's law doesn't differentiate. So would that like be a potential gray
Yeah,
area?
that would be
Yeah.
a gray area.
Okay.
Where because like we in the Lutheran confessions, it specifically calls out military and says it's okay to be part of the military and kill for righteous nationalistic reasons. Not explicitly that's simplistic, but it's in there about why you can be in the military. That would be an example of, like you just said, oh, the law says don't kill, but at the same time, common law says it's okay. So we're going to stick this in category 3 because it's confusing. Okay. But category 3, even if it's confusing, still drives us to Christ. Because we go, I can't fulfill this. I don't know if this is right or wrong. Either way, it's going to drive me to Christ to ask for forgiveness or to seek forgiveness if this ends up being a wrong action or feels like a wrong action. So it serves the same purpose as category 1, but like I said, it's where those gray area questions come in. Like, what's going on with this? Like the killing thing would be a good option, and then that just gets thrown into category 3. But people say category, it's all about like morality, that, oh, you should know deep down this is God's law from your heart. It should tell you what's right and wrong. And then it's like, but then there's things with common law and God's law. So it gets to be confusing. So while we're examining this question, if something like that does come up, we can go, oh, that's category 3. But it still has the same purpose to drive us to Christ.
Right.
Okay.
Mm.
All right. So then we've looked at what law is. So then we go, what is gospel? So the gospel is the works of Scripture that contain and tell us about God's grace offered us through Christ. We have the four actual gospels, each detailing the life, death, and resurrection of Christ in one form or another. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back for a second. Gospel also can refer to things like, I didn't write this down, but it also is a reference to say that's gospel, isn't to say that's the promise of God. All right. Grace would be gospel. I'm not specifically listing out a verse where grace is mentioned, but we say that the promise of grace would be gospel. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
No questions?
So
Okay.
also like preaching the gospel of, passing it on to people.
We're going to look at that. That's coming up.
Okay.
Yeah. Hold on to that question. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So while we're examining what law and gospel are, some key ways to figure out what's law and what's gospel would be to look at the type of language that's used during those situations. For an example, when one is talking about law, whether it's common law or biblical law, there are things like wordage used, like the word command, or one should, one has to, basically saying that you don't have choice. All right. You're being told to do something, so you have to do it. That would be the language of law. Okay.
Okay.
Then we look at the language of gospel. Gospel would not use things like should, have to, command, forced. It uses word language like promise, desire, and grace. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then here's an example that we're going to dissect that basically will answer Cheryl's question right here. Now, this example has examples of law and gospel in it, and I just kind of typed one out real quick. And we're just going to go through and say what in this was an action of the law and what was an action of gospel. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So a pastor or vicar or any authorized individual can give out sacrament every Sunday. They do this as a part of their job and what their calling is and what God is telling them to do. Congregants in a church choose to show up every Sunday because they desire to receive the sacrament in God's word through the gospel reading every Sunday. The service goes along as normal with hymns, readings, and concluding with the pastor distributing sacrament to all who desire it. Now, what actions in this example would be gospel and what would be law?
Oh,
Is
go ahead.
giving out the sacrament every Sunday, is that law?
Well, I think that distributing the sacraments, I think the distribution of sacrament, I would think ties into gospel, but I think that when we say that an authorized individual has to be the one to give it out, I think that starts getting into law.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about receiving sacrament? Is that gospel or law?
Well,
I would think that's gospel.
but
Okay.
Jesus said, do this to remember me. So that's,
Yeah, because we're doing basically what Jesus wanted us to do.
But it's not that if it says Jesus told us to do this, that would be law. Jesus
right.
said, "Do this in remembrance," not do this.
Well, it's also it's a symbolic thing to kind of be, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, but to be with Christ and to have Christ in us. So that in and of itself is moving us closer to Christ. So that would tie into the gospel.
Okay.
If I'm saying that right. I don't know if I said that exactly how I meant it, but I think you get the gist.
So
Yeah.
y'all got it like half right. The first bit of a pastor or vicar or an authorized individual, whether or not they are a pastor or vicar or some kind of office of word and sacrament, distributing communion is law. You are told to distribute communion to all who desire it. So the fact that you're being told to do this means you, based off of your oaths to the church, are required to do it. That is law. That is a requirement of the church. All right. Even though the sacrament, which is gospel, is involved, you're still forced to do this action. Not forced, but you should want to do this action.
That's what I said.
Yes. Now, receiving the sacrament, that is always gospel unless you are forced to receive it. The fact that the language in here that says because they desire to receive the sacrament shows that is gospel because they desire the promise of sacrament.
Right.
And that's one of the main ways that God is as promised to always be present with us is through the sacrament, through Eucharist. Right. Whereas if you were told, do this every Sunday because you have to, that would no longer be gospel. That would be law. You'd be forced to do it this way.
So some churches do tell their people, you have to do this every Sunday, don't they?
If you have to do it, that is law. But if you are given the option to do it, then it's gospel.
Right.
That again would be one of those gray areas, because again, like I said, the sacrament of Eucharist, the Great Thanksgiving, all that, it is promised to us through the gospel that Christ will always be present in that way. Okay, that's gospel. But when you're being told you have to do it every Sunday, that's law. That's now a commandment.
What about confirmation? What about like an adult comes in wanting to have that but didn't go through confirmation or something?
Technically, on paper, you're not supposed to give out sacrament unless they're a baptized individual. confirmation doesn't matter.
Okay.
There's a lot of debate about that, about whether or not everyone should just be able to receive it no matter baptism status. Or officially right now, it says to all who are baptized, no matter confirmation or denomination, you can receive the Eucharist.
Because I know, I mean, I wasn't able to have communion until confirmation. So I don't know. Do they still do that?
I would say they do that for those who want to learn about the church, but that would be an issue of law. You cannot receive this until you do XYZ. You are being told to do something and being restricted from doing something else until this first achievement is done.
Okay.
There are.
I was surprised when was it you who said you couldn't give communion because you weren't a pastor?
Yes, okay, so this is its own conversation, but
yeah,
I am not allowed to distribute I mean, I can distribute Eucharist, but I can't actually do the whole now the body and blood of Christ are fully present in this meal. I'm not sanctioned to do those things.
I think that ties into like I remember when I was in Maryland, we were on supply pastors for a good portion of our later years. So, you know, sometimes if we didn't have a pastor, we would do the service of the word, but very often we might have been able to have the pastor bless the sacraments and then somebody else distributed them.
Yes, you can pre-consecrate the sacrament, and someone authorized to distribute it can do that, which is what I do every Sunday here in West Virginia. I am given pre-consecrated stuff from the previous Sunday. The pastor saves it from the service he did and then gives it to me during the week, and then I use that on Sundays. That is fine, but you have to do that with authorization from the bishop to show that's okay. In the overall Lutheran theology, though, if someone, like, say, is on their deathbed and they really want to receive Eucharist, but there's no, like, pastor on hand, but you have bread and wine right here, you as a normal congregant in person can give them Eucharist, and it'll contain the full body and presence of Christ. But it has to be like a last ditch situation. There's a lot of like rules behind it before you actually do give that stuff. It has to be the last resort.
A question about something you said before, where technically you're supposed to be baptized to receive communion. And I will also use the example of how some denominations will not give communion to other people from outside of their specific denomination. So I'm just trying to reconcile that, because doesn't that actually contradict the gospel? Isn't God's grace for everyone, and wouldn't communion be for everyone regardless of whether you were baptized or follow a certain faith or whatever?
Yeah, and again, that's the debate that's going on. It can be justified really both ways. A lot of people say you don't receive communion until you've learned about what communion is with confirmation and first communion. And then being baptized means you're baptized into that faith and into that community that a lot of people would argue and say Christ, when he said, do this and remember to me, and distribute it out, he distributed to those who were meant to be baptized. And it's not a tool meant to welcome people to the faith. That's what baptism is. It's a tool used to help encourage and use faith to grow, but you're already a part of the faith. So a lot of people make the argument and say that the Eucharist and communion are not to be used as like a welcome tool to encourage people to join church and have their faith established. But others would argue differently, like you just said, Darren, and say, well, Christ said, give it to all who desire it.
Yeah.
So that should not determine baptism status. And so even in the ELCA, they kind of just leave it up to how that pastor of that congregation is feeling. I've seen pastors, like, they won't ask you at the altar, hey, are you baptized? They'll just give you communion. But if they happen to see you beforehand, they'll say, hey, just trying to get to know you, blah, blah, blah. You're welcome to come up, get a blessing, and then we can talk about communion and baptism and all that stuff. But if you're baptized in any denomination in the within the ELCA context and rules, you can receive communion, because we believe in one baptism for all, no matter who does it.
And
Well,
that's
no,
why
no offense.
was
But
that?
no offense, but I don't think being a Lutheran is as important as being a Christian. And, you know, even though I've gone through the whole Lutheran thing, I've been at other churches too. I wouldn't turn anybody away.
Right.
That's
And
why I
it's
kind of
not
like
about turning people away. It's just about making sure that they are baptized into the faith, not the Lutheran faith, the Christian faith.
Okay.
That's what that issue is.
All right.
So, like, you can be baptized any denomination, come to an ELCA congregation that you want to join, receive communion before you do confirmation. That should be fine. It's for everyone who's baptized, not baptized this denomination. That is
Okay. All right. That's what I
that
was
is
trying to,
wrong.
that's what I was struggling with.
The only issue I have with all of that is that's why I like the way we do it at CLC. Is, you know, Pastor Ralph, even Pastor Merring, and even Pastor Jim in the interim, they've always made the comment, you know, if you receive communion in whatever church you're in, you're welcome, you know, or, you know, you're welcome to receive or whatever. You know, they leave it up to the individual. But you know, the whole part of it not being a welcome, I understand that it's not meant to be a welcome tool. You know, I understand that. You know, you want it, you know, it's something to help people grow in their faith. But, you know, at the same time, if somebody comes to our church, like, how do you help that person grow and learn when one of the first things you do is exclude them from something?
And that's the debate. That a lot of people would say it's not who would give it out, and they'd be in that camp of it being a welcome tool. They would say, well, it's not actually a tool for welcoming. We're doing it in making sure they feel included, and we're not excluding them. And then we can talk about confirmation and all that other stuff.
Right.
Like, it shouldn't matter. And people say, well, you're still using it that way. So it, like I said, it really kind of comes down to the pastor's personal feelings for it. If a pastor is at the altar saying and asking about your baptism status, if he's never seen you before, you need to reevaluate who your pastor is. But it's not uncommon for them to see someone new, go introduce themselves, say, hey, these are our practices. Is this okay with you? And if someone said, no, I'm not okay with that, I want to receive communion, I've not been baptized, I don't see a pastor going, well, piss off, like, you're not getting communion. I see them having a calm conversation and going, hey, if you feel that strongly about it, I'm here to give communion to all who desire it. And if they desire it that strongly, yeah, give them communion. But if it's like, hey, we want to make sure you understand what communion is before receiving it, that's something totally different. Like, it's not meant to be like a negative, like, oh, I can't believe, blah, 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 blah. Like, no, it's all about, hey, we just want to make sure everyone's properly educated, understand the importance of the sacrament before they start taking it willy-nilly and not giving it the due respect it deserves.
Right. Okay. All right.
Okay?
Yep.
All right. So, back on topic. So, considering this is off topic. everyone's with me so far about what the question we're evaluating for the month is, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, what would be some answers you would say to that question?
Differences between law and gospel, is that
Yes,
the
what would
question?
you have written down as your answer?
Uh,
I don't have a sentence per se, but just kind of like bullet points in my head where when I think of law, I think of man-made devices, whereas, gospel is given to us by God.
Okay,
right.
and bullet points are fine too. So then, to do a little evaluation and more fun stuff, let's look at our reading from this past weekend. Now, I am so afraid of this all the time now. Y'all's reading this past weekend was Mark 7, correct?
Hold on. Let me see. I forget. The gospel was Mark 7, 1-8, 14, 15, 21, 23.
Yes. Okay, cool. Great. Because ever since I got screwed that one weekend and I had the wrong gospel for a service, I'm asking all the time now. Okay, so I'm gonna read through this. You guys, please jot down some notes along the way about what you hear, whether it's language wise or through actions mentioned, would be law and what would be gospel. So I would recommend like just doing a quick little like T chart and saying law over here, gospel over here, just writing down what you hear. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So,
Where did Darren go?
oh, he's just turned off his camera. Okay. But
Okay.
so Mark chapter 7, verse 1. Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? He said to them, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. Then he called the crowd again and said to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. So, based off of the language that was used, what we just read about, what stuck out as a action of gospel and what was law?
Law was them wanting to wash their hands and all that, the Jewish law and everything.
Yes.
And he explained it's the heart that he's concerned with,
Yes. Okay. That would be example of law. Dietary restrictions, what to do with the washing of pots and everything like that. Those would be considered law. They're traditions, but they're still, oh, hey, Tinky wants in. Admit. Though she didn't join. Oh, there it is. There's Tinky Forehead. Hi, Tinky.
Good morning, Tinky. Can you hear us? Oh, she left.
Okay. What else, whether it's language or anything like that, that was used to be described law versus gospel that you can give me?
In that passage, you mean?
Yes.
I don't have it in front of me, so I.
Oh, am I not sharing it? My bad.
Let's see.
Yeah,
I'm so
that's
sorry.
why I was getting off screen. I was actually going to the reading.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought that was still sharing. My bad.
I don't know if it would fall into the gray area, but like to me, the word that stuck out, which kind of alluded to law versus gospel, was tradition. You
Yes.
know, following something simply because that's, and this is the phrase I hate so much, that's the way we always do it.
Yes. Tradition could fall into that gray area, but traditionally, the word tradition would be associated with gospel. I mean, not with gospel, with law. Sorry, with things that are created by man and by humans to do all this. Like, do we traditionally take communion? Yes. Is the tradition of communion a law? I would say it falls into that category, but the action of desiring communion, which we traditionally do, that is gospel. So it kind of has a toe in that third category. Darren, you're right, but it would lean towards law more than anything. Now, Tinky, you might just have to watch the recording after this. Because we went over a lot. I had a PowerPoint and everything. Tinky, can you hear us? I don't think she can hear us.
And I think, you know, in going back to your question, like what words or phrases, the one that jumps out at me that would signify law also would be do not.
What specifically were you seeing the phrase do not?
Where it says for the Pharisees and all Jews, do not eat unless they thoroughly. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, no. I kind of read the context a little bit wrong, but I mean, in essence, it's basically telling you do not eat unless you wash your hands.
Yes.
Although it's written differently here, and I read it differently in my mind, but
that's fine. Yes, that would be law versus gospel. Now, there are some weird areas, like in verse 8, where it talks about abandoning the commandment for human tradition. Those commandments are still law, and so is human tradition. Those would still fall in law. But now, law is now developed into different tiers within itself. Of course, God's law is above human law and human tradition, which is what is being said there in verse 8. But it does show that categorization and a little bit of exegetical work that needs to be done. And then I would say this right here, where Christ tells the crowd to listen to him, that is a commandment. Listen and understand. That I would say in that phrase, and even though it's coming straight from Christ, there's no gospel in that. It's all a commandment. It's law.
Can anyone hear me? I
Yes,
can't
we
hear
can.
you.
Yes.
can you hear us, Tinky? Can you hear us, Tinky? I guess that's a no.
Yeah, I don't think she can hear us.
I had the sound turned all the way up and it blasted out for about 1 second and then no sound at all.
Can you hear us now?
I don't think so.
No.
Oh dear.
And I'm kind of I mean, I get what you're saying about, you know, Jesus's words being more centered on law than gospel. Like I get that explanation, but I guess I'm just not fully bought into it. Because, you know, if the idea of gospel is to bring us to Christ, like what would bring us more to Christ than his own commands and his own words?
See, and that's where you're confusing law and gospel. The purpose of law is to bring us to Christ. Christ's words are gospel, but Christ can still also be in a part and operate within the law. Because Christ is still a human and Jewish. So he
Right.
still, because after all, Christ did not come to, like he said, to abolish the law, but fulfill it. So
Right.
he can
Yeah.
still say and do law-esque things while at the same time giving out gospel.
Okay, so I think would it be safe to say that, you know, we're talking about Christian law?
In this specific situation, yes.
Because, you know, when you said the phrase that, you know, law, you know, like gospel, law also brings us closer to Christ. Well, in and of itself, law doesn't do that, but Christian law is designed to do that.
Yes.
Okay. And that's when we talk about law versus gospel, I tend to think more of like common laws. So that's why I got to keep it in my mind that we are talking about like kind of Christian laws, so to speak.
Well, that would operate as well with. Oh man, can I do this on here? I have no idea.
Like in my mind, I don't see like our regular laws, like our laws on the books, like the Constitution and all of that, like you alluded to before. I don't see that as being constructed to bring us closer to God.
So okay, I'm having a hard time making this tool work, so I'm just gonna not use it. Okay, so let's break it down like this then. Let's say with law, there is I'm gonna like think of it like a Venn diagram. There is Christian law, and there is common law, or let's say better biblical law and common law. Okay, those can overlap in a Venn diagram,
Right.
where like the circles overlap, and it something can fall into both categories. Okay, but there's an overall broader category which encircles all of that Venn diagram that would also be called law. And law can still all have the same purpose of showing you that you are not a perfect person who sins and does things that are wrong, and direct you to Christ, whether it's Christian law or common law. They all can serve that purpose. So when we're talking about that purpose, we're talking about law as a whole. But then when we talk about the law, it can fall into either category.
I guess I'm just having trouble seeing law as a way to bring us closer to Christ versus gospel or Christian law, because
It's to lead us.
any religion has laws, but not every religion is trying to get you closer to Christ. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm just not seeing law as a device to bring you closer to Christ per se. Whereas if I'm talking about Christian law, then yeah, it was designed to try to make you live a certain way and bring you closer to Christ.
Right. But in a lot of cases, those Christian laws can also be common laws.
But I
Right.
thought the idea was that we think we can do the law, but then when we find out we can't, that's what brings us to Christ.
Yes.
When we fail at it.
Yes, when you fail at law, it's to bring you to it. It can show you how you need Jesus, essentially.
Right.
I understand your confusion, Darren, and of course, gospel can still bring you closer to Christ. It's not like this is the only way to find Christ, but this is the purpose of law, according to Luther.
Well, I think of it this way. I think of an atheist breaking the law.
Right.
There's nothing that person will do or follow that will bring that person closer to Christ. That's kind of like when I think of law, that's what I'm thinking of.
Right. And of course, there's going to be outlier situations like that where the law doesn't, how come they broke the law and it didn't bring them to Christ? Well, it didn't. Okay, cool.
I wasn't trying to get there.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
Faith is a gift from God.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that faith, you don't got that gift. But that's to say that's not its purpose. If you're still not seeing it and not following the purpose of the law, that's on you. Like I can use a spoon as a fork and it'll work fine, but it's still not being used for its purpose of scooping up liquids and using it to stab things. Like, I mean, it's still technically there. I'm just using it wrong, which is fine. You kind of see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I just have to digest it for a bit.
And that's
I
fine.
mean, I get it, but I still just have a little trouble tying in common laws with, like, to me, there's still a little bit of a difference between Christian law and common law.
And there is a difference, but they also can overlap. And at the end of the day, they can also serve the same purpose. And again, those areas where you're kind of getting confused about stuff, that's section 3. That's category 3.
But even if you're an atheist or another religion or whatever, if you are doing what you think you're supposed to be doing and come up short, I mean, that's when you start questioning yourself and are open to receive.
Right, but only the Christian perspective would say that, you know, it's bringing you closer to Christ. You know, to the person who thinks they're doing something morally correct and following laws because of that idea, like, to me, in that person's mind, that's not bringing them closer to Jesus, because they're not trying to get closer to Jesus, is what I'm saying. So I think it's all from a Christian perspective.
And we are Christians in a Christian Bible study.
Right, but but that's why I think there's a slightly more I think there's slightly more delineation between law and Christian law is what I'm saying. That's
right.
Why I'm not seeing it overlap as much as you would think.
Which is fine too. If for some reason you're not seeing common law direct people towards Christ and only Christian law is where you're really seeing that, that's when gospel would come into play as well, where gospel can help bring someone to Christ. But just because, like I said, its purpose isn't being fulfilled doesn't mean that's not the purpose of the law. There are multiple tools in the Christian tool belt.
Right. And I don't disagree with anything you're saying, you know, because we're all approaching this from a similar perspective. Right. Because we're all practicing Christians.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, just for a non-Christian, if a non-Christian was in this discussion, it's just not bringing that person closer to Christ.
Well, then think of it like this. Okay. So if a non-Christian, you encounter them and you want to share gospel with them and bring them closer to Christ. Okay. You share the gospel with them. They like it. It resonates with them. And now they're going to church and everything like that. They received gospel, not law. Correct?
True.
Right.
We as Christians are told to spread the gospel. You, as Darren, are enacting an action of law because you're told to do something. Law still brought that person to Christ, as well as the gospel did the same thing. It just came from a different avenue. You with me?
Yeah.
So it can take multiple different shapes and forms. Again, that's where that third category comes in. But that is its overall purpose. I can take a screwdriver whose purpose is to screw screws and use it as a hammer, and it won't work very well, but it'll do the job. But I'm not using it for its purpose. It doesn't mean its purpose isn't still to screw things. So, but that's our time this week.
8 o'clock already? Ooh.
Yeah, I hope that was a fun one that made you all think about some stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. Stop making us think so much, wait.
Yeah. Darren, please send me the recording for this so I can maybe do a little bit of video editing tomorrow. I will say that anyone who has any questions about this, please feel free to reach out, email me, whatever. Also, please feel free to jot them down in your journal to share them next week if you want. But everyone have a nice evening. Thank you so
And
much.
I'm assuming that
Where'd he go?
well, I was gonna say I was assuming that Tinky can hear us, but I think
No, I don't
we
think
heard her,
she
she
can
couldn't hear us.
I think we can hear her.
Right, which is why I'm kind of wondering why she stayed on. But can you share your PowerPoint with her since she couldn't get on for most of it?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Somebody
we can hear
raise
you.
your hand if you
Yes.
can.
Hello, Tinky.
Can you
Okay,
hear
I've
us?
been reading what you all have been saying, but I couldn't get every bit of it. But
Oh.
I feel like if you first follow God's law, God is going to want you to follow the proper man's law. Now, it's not as easy to reverse that as you were saying, Lucas. Man's law doesn't always bring you to God's law.
Which is true. But for Darren, send me the video of this. I can edit it, and also send me Tinky's email, and I can send her my PowerPoint as well. Okay.
Okay, and sometimes it takes a while for it to completely like render.
Yeah, I get
like,
that.
until the next day. So if you don't get it by tomorrow afternoon, just shoot me a reminder.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you. Thank you all
All
so
right.
much for choosing to tune
Later,
in.
everyone. Cheryl, I'll see you tomorrow morning.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.
Get your beauty sleep because it's
Bye.
bright and early tomorrow.
I know it is. Lucas still there?
No, he just left.
Okay. All right. Well, y'all have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night. How do I get out of here? I'm the only one here. Okay. Ta-da. Get me out of here.